The Iliad, Chapman's Homer, Book 21, wherein Achilles will take on the river in his rage and the very fundamental gods of nature. The argument. In two parts Troy hosted parted. Thetis' son, one to Scamander, one to Ilion, pursues. 12 lords he takes alive to end in sacrifice for vengeance to his friend. Asteropaeus dies by his fierce hand, and Priam's son, Lycaon. Over land the flood breaks where Achilles being engaged, Vulcan preserves him, and with spirit enraged sets all the champaign of the floods on fire. Contention then doth all the gods inspire. Apollo in Agenor's shape doth stay, Achilles' fury, and by giving way, makes him pursue, till the deceit gives leave, that Troy in safety might her friends receive. Fie at the flood's shore doth express the labours of Achilles. And now they reached the goodly swelling channel of the flood, gulf-eating Xanthus, whom Jove mixed with his immortal brood, and there Achilles cleft his host of Ilion. One side fell on Xanthus, the other on the town, and that he did impel, the same way that the last day's rage put all the Greeks in rout. When Hector's fury reigned, these now Achilles poured about the scattered field, to stay the fight. Saturnia cast before their hasty feet a standing fog, and then the flight's violence bore, the other half full on the flood. The silver gulfed deep received them with a mighty cry, the billows vast and steep roared at their armours, which the shores did round about resound. This way and that they swum, and shrieked as in the gulfs they drowned. And as in fired fields locusts rise, as the unwearied blaze plies still their rising, till in swarms all rush as in a maze for scape into some neighbour flood, so the Achillean stroke he drave the foe, the gulfy flood, with men and horse did choke. Then on the shore the worthy hid, and left his horrid lance amid the tamarisks, and sprite-like did with his sword advance up to the river. Ill affairs took up his furious brain for Troy's engagements. Every way he doubled, slain on slain. A most unmanly noise was made. With those he put to sword, of groans and outcries the flood blushed to be so engorged with such base souls, and as small fish with swift-finned dolphin fly, filling the deep pits in the ports, on whose close strength they lie. And there he swallows them in shoals, so here the rocks and holes about the flood the Trojans fled, and there most lost their souls, even till he tired his slaughterous arm. 12 fair young princes then he chose of all to take alive, to have them freshly slain on that most solemn day of wreck, resolved on for his friend. These led he trembling forth the flood, as fearful of their end as any hind calves. All their hands and pinion behind, with their own girdles worn upon their rich weeds, and resigned their persons to his myrmidons, to bear to fleet. And he plunged in the stream again, to make more work of tragedy. He met, then issuing the flood with all intent of flight, Lycaon, Dardan Priam's son, whom lately in the night he had surprised, as in a wood of Priam's he had cut the green arms of a wild fig tree, to make him spokes to put in the naves of this new chariot. Ill then, all unthought, stole on him in Achilles' shape, who took him thence, and brought to well-built Lemnos, selling him to famous Jason's son, from whom a guest then in the house of Imbrius Ithion, redeemed at high rate, and sent home Tarispa, whence he fled, and saw again his father's court 11 days back amongst his friends. And the 12th, God thrust his hapless head again into the hands of stern Achilles, who now must send him slain to Pluto's court, and against his will, him when Achilles knew, naked of helmet, shield, sword, lance, all which for ease he threw to earth, being overcome with sweat and labour wearying his flying knees, he stormed and said, O heaven, a wondrous thing invades mine eyes. Those Ilians that heretofore I slew rise from the dark dead quick again. This man fate makes issue of her own steel fingers. He was sold in Lemnos, and the deep of all seas, twixt this Troy and that many a man doth keep from his loved country, bars not him. Come then, he now shall taste the head of Peleus, and try if steel will down as fast as other fortunes or kind earth can any surer seize. On his sly person whose strong arms have held down Hercules. His thoughts thus moved, while he stood firm to see if he spied would offer flight, which first he thought, but when he had descried, he was descried, and flights was vain, fearful, he made more nigh, with purpose to embrace his knees, and now longed much to fly, his black fate and abhorred death by coming in. His foe observed all this, and up he raised his lance that he would throw, and then Lycaon close ran in, fell on his breast, and took Achilles' knees, whose lance was on earth now stayed did overlook. His steel turned back, and thirst to glut his sharp point with the blood that lay so ready. That thirst Lycaon's thirst withstood to save his blood. Achilles' knee in one hand he knit, his other with the hell-long lance hard, and would not part with it, but thus besought, I kiss thy knees, divine Achilles. Respect me, and my fortunes rue. I now present the access of a poor suppliant for thy ruth, and I am one that is worthy thy ruth. O Jove's beloved, first hour my miseries fell into any hand 'twas thine. I tasted all my bread by thy gift since, since that hour that I surprisal led from forth the fair wood my sad feet, far from my loved allies, to famous Lemnos, where I found 100 oxen prize to make my ransom, for which now I thrice the worth will raise. This day makes 12, since I arrived in Ilion, many days, being spent before in sufferance, and now a cruel fate thrusts me again into thy hands. I should have haunt this Jove with hate, with such set malignity gives thee my life again. There are but two of us for whom Letho suffered pain. Altho, old Altes seed, Alte, whose palace stood in height of upper Pedasus, near Satnius' silver flood, and ruled the warlike Leligae, whose seed as many more King Priam married and begot the godlike Polydore, and me, accursed. Thou slaughterest him, and now thy hand on me will prove as mortal. I did think when I met with thee, I could not scape thee. Yet give ear and add thy mind to it. I told my birth too intimate. The one sire did beget, yet one womb brought not into light Hector, that slew thy friend and me. I do not kill me then, but let the wretched end of Polydore excuse my life. For half our being bred brothers to Hector, he half paid, no more is forfeited. Thus sued he, humbly. But he heard with this austere reply, Fool, urge not ruth nor price to me till that solemnity, resolved on for Patroclus' death, pay all his rights to fate, till his death die did grace to Troy, and many lives did rate at price of ransom, but none now. Of all the brood of Troy, whoever Jove throws to my hands, shall any breath enjoy that death can beat out, specially that touch of Priam's race. Die, die, my friend. What tears are these? What sad looks spoil thy face? Patroclus died, that far past thee. Nay, seat'st thou not beside myself, even I, a fair young man, are rarely magnified, and to my father being a king, a mother to have that sits in rank with goddesses, and yet, when thou hast spent thy spirit's death, and as violent a fate must overtake even me, by twilight, mornlight, day, high noon, whenever destiny sets on her manner to hurl a lance or knit out of his string an arrow that must reach my life. This said, a languishing Lycaon's heart bent like his knees, yet left them strength advance. Both hands in mercy, for as he kneeled, his foe yet leaves his lance, and forth his sword flies, which he hid in the furrow of a wound. Driven through the jointure of his neck, fell that he on the ground, stretched with death's pangs, and all earth imbrued with timeless blood. Then gripped he Achilles' heel, and to the lofty flood flung, swinging his unpitied course, to see it swim and toss upon the rough waves, and said, Go, feed fat the fish with loss. Of thy left blood they clean will suck thy green wounds, and this saves thy mother tears upon thy bed. Deep Xanthus on his waves shall hoist thee bravely to a tomb, that in her burly breast the sea shall open, where great fish may keep thy funeral feast. With thy white fat, and on the waves dance at thy wedding fate, clad in black horror, keeping close, inaccessible state. So perish Ilians, till we pluck the brows of Ilion down to her feet. You flying still, I flying still upon, thus in the rear, and as my brows were forked with rabbit horns, toss ye together. This brave flood strengthens and adorns your city with his silver gulfs, to whom so many bulls your zeal hath offered, which blind zeal his sacred current gulls, with casting chariots and horse quick to his prayed for aid, shall nothing profit, perish then, till cruel death hath laid all the red feet of revenge for my slain friend, and all with whom the absence of my hands made yours a festival. This speech gave Xanthus more enraged, and made his spirit contend for means to shut up the oped vein against him, and defend the Trojans in it from the plague. In meantime, Peleus' son, now with that long lance he hid, for more blood set upon Asteropaeus, the descent of Pelagon, and he of broad-streamed Axius, and the dame of first nativity. To all the daughters that renowned Acasamanus' seed, bright Peribea, whom the flood, armed thick with lofty reed, compressed. At her grandchild now, when Thetis, his great son, whose foe stood armed with 2 darts, being set on by Xanthus, angered so for those youths' blood shed in his stream by vengeful Thetis' son, without all mercy. Both being near, great Thetis begun with this high question: of what race art thou that darest oppose thy power to mine thus? Cursed wounds they ever did disclose that stood my anger. He replied, what makes thy fury's heat talk and seek pedigrees? Far hence lies my innovative seat in rich Paeonia. My race from broad-streamed Axius runs, Axius that gives earth purest drink of all the watery sons of great Oceanus, and got the famous for his spear Pelenagus, that fathered me, and these Paeonians here, armed with long lances, here I lead, and here the 11th fair light shines on us, since we entered Troy. Come now, brave men, let's fight. Thus spake he, threatening, and to him Pelides made reply, with shaken Peleus, but his foe with 2 at once let fly, for both his hands with dexterous one javelin struck the shield of Thetis' son, but struck not through the gold god's rift, repelled the eager point. The other lance fell lightly on the part of his fair right hand's cubit. Forth the black blood spun, the dart glanced over, fastening on the earth, and there his spleen was spent, that wished the body, with which wish Achilles his lance sent, that quite missed and fixed itself fast in steep upshore, even to the midst it entered it. Himself then fiercely bore upon his enemy with his sword. His foe was tugging hard to get his lance out. Thrice he plucked, and thrice sure Peleus barred. He wished evulsion. The 4th pluck, he bowed, meant to break the ashen plant, but ere that act Achilles' sword did check his bent power and break out his soul. Full in the navel stead, he ripped his belly up, and out his entrails fell, and dead his breathless body, whence his arms Achilles drew, and said, lie there. Prove it dangerous to lift up adverse head against Jove's sons, although a flood were ancestor to thee. Thy vaunts urged him, but I may vaunt a higher pedigree, from Jove himself, King Peleus, son to Aeacus, infernal Aeacus to Jove, and I to Peleus. Thunder-voiced Jove far passeth floods, that only murmurs raise, with earth and water as they run with tribute to the seas, and his seed theirs exceeds by far. A flood, a mighty flood, raged near thee now, but with no aid. Jove must not be withstood. King Achilles yields to him, and great Oceanus, whence all floods, all seas, all founts, wells deep, humorous, fetch their beginnings, yet even he fears Jove's flash, and crack his thunder gives, when out of heaven it tears to his rack. Thus plucked he from his shore his lance, and left the waves to wash. The wave-sprung entrails about which thousands and other fish did shoal, to nibble at the fat which his sweet kidneys hid. This for himself. Now to his men the well-rowed peons did in his rage contend, all which cold fear shock into flight to see their captain slain, at whose mazed flight as much enraged flew he. And then fell all these, Thracius, Medon, Astypulus, great Ophelestes, Aeneas, Menaeus, Thasilicus. And on these many more had fallen, unless the angry flood had took the figure of a man, and in a whirl-pit stood, thus speaking to Achilles. Past all power feeds thy will, thou great-grandchild of Iacchus, and past all that and ill, and all gods themselves confederates, and Jove the best of gods, all deaths gives thee, all places not. Make my shore periods to all shore service. In the field let thy field acts run high, not in my waters. My sweet streams choke with mortality of men slain by thee. Carcasses so glut me that I fail to pour into the sacred sea my waves, yet still assail thy cruel forces. Cease, amaze affects me with thy rage, prince of the people. He replied, shall thy command assuage, gulf-fed Scamander, my free wrath? I'll never leave pursued proud Ilion's slaughters till his hand in her filled walls conclude her flying forces, hath tried in single fight the chance of war with Hector, whose event with stark death shall advance one of our conquests. Thus again he like a fury flew upon the Trojans. When the flood his sad plaint did pursue to bright Apollo, telling him he was too negligent of Jove's high charge, importuning by all means vehement his help of Troy, till latest even should her black shadows pour on earth's broad breast. In all his worst, Achilles yet from shore leapt to his midst. Then swelled his waves, then raged, then boiled again against Achilles. Up flew all, and all the body slain, all his deeps, which the heaps made bridges to his waves, he belched out, roaring like a bull. The unslain yet he saves in his black whirlpits, vast, deep. A horrid billow stood about Achilles. On his shield the violence of the flood beat so, he drave him back, tuck his feet up, his fair palm enforced to catch his stay with a broad and lofty elm, whose roots he tossed up with his hold and tore up all the shore. With this then he repelled the waves, and those thick arms it bore. He made a bridge to bear them off, for all fell in, when he from the channel threw himself, the rage did terrify, even with his great spirit, and made him add wings to his swiftest feet, and tread the land, and yet not there the flood left his retreat, but thrust his billows after him, blacked them all at top, to make him fear and fly his charge, and set the flood field up for Troy to scape in. He sprung out at dart's cast, but came again, on again, with a redoubled force, as when the swiftest flown and strongest of all fowls, Jove's black hawk, the huntress, stoops upon a much-loved quarry, so charged he his arms with harrowed rung against the black waves. Yet again he was so urged he flung his body from the flood and fled. And after him again the waves flew roaring, as a man that finds a water vein, and from some black fount is to bring his streams through plants and groves, goes with his mattock, and all checks set to his course removes, when that runs freely, under it the pebbles all give way, and where that finds to fall runs swift, nor can he leader stay his current then, before himself fall paced, it murmurs on. So of Achilles evermore the strong flood vantage won. Though most deliver, gods are still above the powers of men. As oft the able godlike man endeavoured to maintain his charge on them that kept the flood, and charged as he would try, if all the gods inhabiting the broad unreached sky could daunt his spirit, so oft still the rude waves charged him round, ramped on his shoulders, from whose depth his strength and spirit would rebound, up to the free air vexed in his soul. And now the vehement flood, made faint his knees, so overthwart his waves while they would stud all the nigh dust which he wished, and now was fain to cry, casting his eyes to that broad heaven that late he longed to try, and said, O Jove, how am I left? No god vouchsafes to free me, miserable man. Help now and after torture me with any outrage. Would to heaven Hector, the mightiest bred in this region, had embrued his javelin in my breasts, that strong may fall by strong. Where now weak waters, luxury must make my death blush. One heaven-born shall like a hog-herd die, drowned in a dirty torrent's rage. Yet none of you in heaven I blame for this, but she alone by whom this life was given, that now must die thus. She would still delude me with her tales, affirming Phoebus's shaft should end with in the Trojan walls my cursed beginning. In this strait, Neptune and Pallas flew to fetch him off, in men's shapes, both close to his danger drew, and taking both hands, thus spake the shaker of the world: Pelides, do not stir a foot, nor these waves proudly curled against thy bold breast fear a jot. Thou hast us too, thy friends. Neptune and Pallas, Jove himself, approving they do we lend. 'Tis nothing as thou fear'st with fate, she will not see thee drowned. This height shall soon down, thine own eyes shall see it set aground. Be ruled then, will advise thee well, take not thy hand away from putting all indifferently to all that it can lay upon the Trojans, to the walls of haughty Ilion conclude, all in a desperate flight. And when thou hast set gone, the soul of Hector turn to fleet, our hands shall plant a wreath of endless glory on thy brows. Thus to the free from death both made retreat. He much impelled by charge the godheads gave, the field that was now overcome, that many boundless wave, he overcame. On their wild breasts they tossed the carcasses and arms of many a slaughtered man, and now the winged knees of this great captain bore aloft. 'Gainst the flood he flies with full assault, nor could that god make shrink his rescued thighs, nor shrunk the flood, but as his foe grew powerful he grew mad, thrust up a billow to the sky, and crystal Simois bade to his assistance. Simois, ho brother, out he cried, come add thy current and resist this man half deified, or Ilion he will pull down straight, and the Trojans cannot stand a minute longer. Come, assist, and instantly command all fountains in thy rule to rise, all torrents to make in. Stuff thy bellows with whose height engender such a din, with trees torn up, and justling stones, that so amain a man may shrink beneath us whose power thrives to do my power all it can. He dares things fitter for a god, but nor his form, nor force, nor glorious arms shall profit it, all which, and his head dead corse, I vow to roll up in my sands, nay, bury in my mud, nay, in the very sinks of Troy that poured in my flood, shall make him drowning work enough, and being drowned I'll set forth of such strong filth on him that Greece shall never forget his bones from it. There shall stand Achilles' sepulture, and save a burial for his friends, till his fury did transfer his high-ridged billows on the prince, roaring with blood and foam and carcasses. The crimson stream did snatch into a womb, surprised Achilles, and her height stud held up by the hand of Jove himself. Then Juno called to countermand this watery deity, the god that holds command in fire, afraid lest that gulf-stomached flood would satiate his desire on great Achilles. Mulciber, my beloved son, she cried, rouse thee, for all the gods conceive this flood thus amplified is raised at thee, and shows as if his waves would drown the sky, and out all sphere of fire. Haste, help thy empire. Light flames deep his pits. Ourselves the west wind and the south will call out of the sea, and breathe in either's full-charged mouth. A storm to enrage thy fires against Troy, which shall in one exhaled blow flames of sweat about their brows, and make their armors scaled. Go thou then, and against these winds rise, make worth on Xanthus' shore, with setting all his trees on fire, and in his own breasts pour. A fervour that shall make it burn, nor last the fair words or threats. Avert thy fury till I speak, and then subdue the heats of all thy blazes. Mulciber prepared a mighty fire, first in the fields used, burning up the bodies that the ire of great Achilles reft of souls. The quite drowned field it tried, and shrunk the flood up. And as fields that have been long time cloyed with catching weather, when their corn lies on the gable heap, are with a constant north wind dried, with which, for comfort, leap their hearts that sowed them, so this field was dried, the bodies burnt, and even the flood into a fire as bright as day was turned. Elms, willows, tamarisks were inflamed, the lote trees, sea-grass, reeds, and rushes, with the galingale, roots of which abundance breeds about the sweet flood, all were fired. The gliding fishes flew upwards in flames. The grovelling eels crept upright, all which slew wise Vulcan's unresisted spirit. The flood, out of a flame, cried to him, Cease, O Mulciber! No deity can tame thy matchless virtue, nor would I, since thou art thus hot, strive. Cease then thy strife. Let Thetis' son all thy wished haste drive, even to their gates, these Ilians. That toucheth me their aid, or this contention. Thus in flames the burning river prayed, and as a cauldron, under put with store of fire, and wrought with boiling of a well-fed brawn, up leaps his wave aloft, bavens of seerwood, urging it, and spending flames apace, till all the cauldron being girt with a consuming blaze, so round this flood burned, so sod his sweet and tortured streams, nor could flow forth, bound in the fumes of Vulcan's fiery beams. Who then not moved with his mother's ruth by all his means he craves, and asked why Vulcan should invade and so torment his weaves past other floods, when his offence rose not to such degree as that of other gods for Troy, and that himself would free her wrath to it, if she were pleased, and prayed her that her son might be reflected, adding this, that he would ne'er be one to help keep off the ruinous day on which all Troy should burn, fired by the Grecians. This vow heard, she charged her son to turn his fiery spirits to their homes, and said it was not fit a god to suffer so for men. Then Vulcan did remit his so unmeasured violence, and back the pleasant flood ran to his channel. Thus these gods she made friends, the other stud. At weighty difference both sides ran together with a sound that earth resounded, and great heaven about did surround. Jove heard it, sitting on his hill, laughed to see the gods buckle to arms like angry men, and he pleased with their odds, they laid it freely. Them all thump buckler Mars began, and at Minerva with a lance of brass he headlong ran, these vile words, ushering his blows. Thou dogfly, what's the cause? Thou makest gods fight thus. Thy huge heart breaks all our peaceful laws. With thy insatiate shamelessness, rememberest that thou the hour when Diomed charged me by thee, and thou, with all thy power, lanced thyself, and in all sights rushed on me with a wound. Now vengeance falls on thee for all. This said, the shield fringed round with fighting adders borne by Jove, that not the thunder yields. He clapped his lance on, and as God that with the blood of fields pollutes his godhead, that shield pierced and hurt the armed maid. But back she leapt, and with her strong hand rapped a huge stone laid above the champaign, black and sharp, that did in old time break partitions to men's lands, and that she dusted in the neck of that impetuous challenger. Down to the earth he swayed, and overlaid 7 acres land. His hair was all bewrayed with dust and blood mixed, and his arms wrung out. Minerva laughed, and thus insulted. O thou fool, yet hast thou not been taught to know mine eminence? Thy strength opposeth thou to mine. So pay thy mother's furies then, who for these aids of thine ever afforded perjured Troy. Greece ever left takes spleen and vows thee mischief. Thus she turned, her blue eyes when love's queen, the hand of Mars tuck from the earth raised him with thick-drawn breath, his spirits not yet got up again, but from the press of death. Kind Aphrodite was his guide, with Juno seeing exclaimed, Pallas, see me, Mars is helped from field, dogfly, his rude tongue named thyself even now. That is love, that dogfly will not leave her old consort upon her fly. Minerva did receive this excitation joyfully, and at the Cyprian flew, struck with her hard hand her soft breast, a blow that overthrew both her and Mars, and there both lay together in broad field. When thus she triumphed, so lie all that any succours yield to these false Trojans gainst the Greeks, so bold and patient as Venus shunning charge of me, and no less impotent. Be all their aids than hers to Mars, so short work would we made in our depopulating Troy, this hardiest to invade of all earth's cities. At this wish, white-wristed Juno smiled. Next Neptune and Apollo stood upon the point of field, and thus spake Neptune. Phoebus, come, why at lance's end stand we two thus? 'Twill be a shame for us to be reascend to Jove's golden house, being thus in field and not to fight. Begin, for 'tis no graceful work for me thou hast the younger chin, I older and no more. Oh, fool, what a forgetful heart thou bear'st about thee, to stand here pressed to take the Ilian part, and fight with me. Forgett'st thou then what we two, we alone of all the gods, have suffered here when proud Laomedon enjoyed our service a whole year for our agreed reward? Jove in his sway would have it so, and in that year I reared this broad, brave wall about this town, that being a work of mine, it might be inexpugnable. This service then was thine, in Ida, that so many hills and curled head forests crowned to feed his oxen, crooked shanked and headed like the moon. But when the much joy-bringing hours brought term for our reward, the terrible Laomedon dismissed us both, and scarred our high deservings, not alone to hold our promises free, fee that but must give us threats too, hands and feet he swore to fetter thee, sell thee as a slave, dismissed far hence to foreign isles. Nay, more, he would have both our ears. His vows breach and reviles made us party, angry with him. Dost thou gratulate now such a king's subjects, or with us not their destructed vow, even to their chaste wives and their babes? He answered, he might hold his wisdom little, if with him a god for men he would maintain contention. Wretched man that flourishes for a time like leaves, eats some of that earth yields, give earth in their prime their whole selves for it. Quickly then, let us fly, fight for them, nor show it offered, let themselves bear out their own extreme. Thus he retired, feared to change blows with his uncle's hands. His sister therefore chid him much, the goddess that commands in names and games of hunting, and thus spake, fliest thou, and leav'st the field to Neptune's glory and blows? Fool, why dost thou yield thy idle bow? No more my ears shall hear thee vaunt in skies, dares to meet Neptune, but I'll tell thy coward's tongue, it lies. He answered nothing, yet Jove's wife could put on no such reins, but spake loosely. How darest thou, dog, whom no fear contains, encounter me? 'Twill prove a match of hard condition. Though the great lady of the bow, and Jove hath set thee down for lion of thy sex, which gift to slaughter any dame the proud will envies, yet some dames will prove that hadst better tame wild lions upon hills than them. But if this question rests, yet under judgment in thy thoughts, and that thy mind contests, I'll make thee know it. Suddenly with her left hand she catched both Cynthia's palms, locked fingers fast, and with her right she snatched from her fair shoulders her gilt bow, and laughing laid it on about her ears, and every way her turning seized upon, till all her arrows scattered, her quiver emptied quite, And as a dove that flying a hawk takes some rock her flight, and in his hollow breast sits safe, her fate not yet to die, so fled she mourning, and her bow left there. Then Mercury, his opposite thus untook, Latona at no hand will I bide combat. 'Tis a work right dangerous to stand at difference with the wives of Jove. Go therefore, freely vaunt amongst the deities, that's subdued. But may thy combatant yield with plain power. She answered not, but gathered up the bow. Shafts fallen from her daughter's side, retiring up did go. Diana to Jove's starry hall, her incorrupted veil, trembling about her so she took. Phoebus, lest Troy should fail, before her fate, flew to her walls, the other deities flew. Up to Olympus, some enraged, some glad, and Achilles slew both men and horse of Ilion. And as a city fired casts up a heat that purples heaven, clamours and shrieks expired in every corner, toil to all, and many misery, which fire then censed gods let fall, Achilles so let fly. Rage on the Trojans, toils and shrieks as much by him imposed. Old Priam in his sacred tower stood, the flight disclosed of his forced people, all in rout, and not a stroke returned by fled resistance. His eyes saw in what a fury burned the son of Peleus, and down went weeping from the tower. To all the port guards and their chiefs told of his flying power, commanding the opening of the ports, but not to let their hands stir from them, for Iacides would pour in with his bands. Destruction comes. I'll shut them straight. When we are in, he prayed. For not our walls I fear to check, will this check this violent man, this said. Off lifted they the bars, the ports, hauled open. They gave safety her entry with the host, which yet they could not save, had not Apollo sallied out, struck destruction. Brought by Achilles in their necks, back when they right upon the ports bore all dry, dusty, spent, and on their shoulders rode rabid Achilles with his lance, still glory being the goad that pricked his fury. Then the Greeks high-ported Ilion had seized, had not Apollo stirred Antenor's famous son, divine Agenor, and cast in an undertaking spirit to his bold bosom, and himself stood by to strengthen it and keep the heavy hand of death from breaking in. The god stood by him, leaning on a beach, and covered his abode. With night-like darkness, yet for all the spirit he inspired, when that great city razed force, his thoughts he struck. He retired, stood, and went on, a world of doubts still falling in his way, when angry with himself he said, why suffer I this day? In this so strong need to go on, if, like the rest, I fly, 'tis his best weapon to give chase. Being swift, and I should die. Like to a coward, if I stand, I fall too. These two ways please not my purpose. I would live. What if I suffer these still to be routed, and my feet affording further length, pass all these fields of Ilion till Ida's sylvan strength and steep heights shroud me, even refresh me in the flood, and turn to Ilion? My soul, why drown'st thou in the blood of these discourses? If this course that talks of further flight, I give my feet, his feet more swift have more odds. Get he sight of that pass, I pass least for pace and length of pace. His thighs will stand out all men. I meet him then. My steel hath faculties of power to pierce him. His great breast but one soul holds, and that death claims his right in, all men say. But he holds special state in Jove's high bounty. That's past man, every way will hold, and that serves all men every way. This last heart made him bold to stand Achilles and stirred up a mighty mind to blows, and as a panther, having heard the sounds and hounds and trails, doth disclose her freckled forehead, stares forth from out some deep-grown wood to try what strength dares her abroad. And when her fiery blood The hounds have kindled, no quench serves of love to live or fear. Though struck, though wounded, though quite through, she feels the mortal spear. But till the man's close strength she tries, or strows earth with his dart, she puts her strength out. So it fared and fared with brave Agenor's heart, till Achilles he had proved no thoughts, no deeds once stirred his fixed foot. To his broad breast his round shield he preferred, and up his arms went with his aim, his voice out with this cry: Thy hope is too great, Peleus' son, this day to show thine eye. Troy's Ilion at thy foot. O fool! Greeks with much more woes, more than are suffered yet, must buy great Ilion's overthrows. We are within her many strong, that for our parents' sake, our wives and children will save Troy, and thou, though he that makes thy name so terrible, shalt make a sacrifice to her. Thine own ruins thus he threw, nor did his javelin err, but struck his foe's leg near his knee. The fervent steel did ring against his tin greaves, and leapt back. The fire's strong-handed king gave virtue of repulse. And then Achilles assailed divine Agenor, but in vain. Apollo's power prevailed, and rapt Agenor from his reach, whom quietly he placed without skirmish, casting mists to save from being chased his tended person. And he gone to give his soldiers scape. The deity turned Achilles still, by putting on the shape of him he thirsted. Evermore he fed his eye and fled, and he with all his knees pursued, so cunningly he led, that still he would not bear his reach to draw his rage with hope, far from the conflict to the flood, maintaining still the scope of his attraction. In the meantime, the other frighted powers came to the city, comforted, when Troy and all her towers, strewed with fillers, none would stand to see who stayed without, who scaped and who came short, the ports cleft to receive the rout that poured itself in. Every man was for himself, most fleet, most fortunate. Whoever scraped his head might thank his feet.